Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon again. My name is Raul Guzman. I'm the director of the OSHA Education Center here at Cal State Dominguez Hills. I guess I could.
Yep,
No spacebar working.
spacebar works.
Okay. All right. So again, welcome again. For those of you that are participating through Zoom, please make sure that you are posting your questions on the Q&A button, which is located at the bottom of your screen. And then we are going to try to answer any questions that you post there live. And so we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. If we can't get to all the questions, we'll go ahead and answer those and then share those with everyone that participated here today. And so today's agenda, we're gonna have OSHA here, and OSHA's here in Cal OSHA, who is gonna help us kick off the event. Additionally, we have ASSP, who's going to be sharing information about their chapter. And then our main presentation today is about ANSI Z359.1-2020. Then we'll have 3M from Personal Safety, who's going to cover the latest and greatest on personal protective equipment, as well as the ABCs of fall protection. And then at the end, we'll have our raffle, which we're going to raffle a course with a value of up to $815. So to help us kick off the event, I want to go ahead and introduce Derek Engard, and he is the area director for California, Arizona, and Nevada. Even though it says San Diego office, he is covering California, Nevada, and Arizona. So, Derek.
Great. Thanks, Raul. Hello, everybody. My name is Derek Engard. Like Raul said, I'm the Air Director for Federal OSHA. We've got offices in Phoenix, Las Vegas, San Diego, and Oakland, and I'm based here in San Diego. It's ironic, too. Actually, we've got multiple buildings going up, high-rise buildings down here in downtown San Diego. So I appreciate the Institute for hosting this event. And this will actually be OSHA's 12th annual National Safety Stand Down to prevent falls in construction. This week across the country, employers and employees are voluntarily stepping down and stopping work to focus on safety. So thank you for recognizing this vital safety issue by standing down with us today. It may only take a few minutes to do a quick job, but it only takes a split second to fall and lose your life. It's not worth it, right? So please follow the national campaign to prevent falls in construction motto as plan, provide, and train on fall protection techniques and methods. The goal of the stand down remains the same. We want to raise fall hazard awareness so we can prevent fatalities and injuries related to falls to a lower level. OSHA's here because we want you to go home tonight and every night. These opportunities are for employers and workers to have conversations about training, hazards, protective methods, and the company's safety policies and goals. We know that incidents related to falls are preventable, and the stand down is an excellent way to raise awareness and help save lives. As a community, we must continue focusing on this effort until falls no longer remain the leading cause of fatalities in construction. It is crucial to continually improve safety practices and increase collaboration to prevent these tragic and avoidable accidents. Let's make it our collective goal to achieve OSHA's target of 0 fatalities or injuries related to falls to a lower level. Everyone has a continuing role in helping to prevent falls, not just during this fall stand down, but every day, right? All year long. It's through our combined efforts that we can be successful in reducing these fatalities. This stand down and others like it around the world are opportunities for employers and employees to focus on fall hazards they face and ways to prevent them and survive them. It's all about protecting the company's most valuable asset, right? The workers. We can't get it done without them. At the end of each workday, we want everyone to return home safe to their families the same way they left each morning. Again, thank you for your partnership on this issue, and thank you for standing down to stop falls today. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. And once again, we appreciate the support. Next, we have Adan Hassan from the Cal OSHA office.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can everybody hear me? Yeah, my name is Hassan Aden. I'm a regional manager for Cal OSHA in Southern California. And I second everything, Derek talked about, the stand down, especially this is the 12th year dealing with fall protection. Good afternoon, and thank you for organizing this great safety stand down and inviting Cal OSHA to be part of it. We appreciate the opportunity to join you and to speak to you about stand down for safety. Safety is a subject that's near and dear to all of us, and that it is the safety and health of every worker, woman and man in the state of California. It's becoming increasingly clear that there's no margin of error when it comes to the protection of workers from safety and health hazards at workplaces. Safety stand down is an opportunity for all of us to make sure that every employee at a work site understands and follows safety rules, industry practices, safety practices, and regulations. My message to you today and to workers in the state of California, and to employees, to employers, associations, and to others is that Cal OSHA alone and Federal OSHA alone cannot achieve its mission and goals to protect workers. It's our responsibility to make sure that every worker returns home every day safe and healthy, and it's going to take a collaborative effort because worker safety and health is everybody's business. Let's pause for 1 minute, not just for a moment of silence, but for a moment to reflect and to stand down for safety. So if we could all just pause for 1 minute. Can you count 60 seconds? That'll be 1 minute. So let's just pause and reflect of all the things that we've done for the last year to stand down for safety. Thank you. What is your understanding of a safety stand down? A safety stand down is a moment for employers to directly have a dialogue with their workers about safety and health hazards at their place of employment and how to eliminate these hazards, follow company safety policies and goals. It's also an opportunity for workers to talk to their employers about safety at their workplaces. Again, I want to thank all of you for what you are doing to protect your workers and joining us for this year's Stand Down for Safety. Thank you. I'm going to turn over to Rob.
Thank you, Hassan. And once again, we appreciate the support from Cal OSHA. It's always good to have you guys at these events. Before we get started with the main presentation, I'd like to invite Denise Tienen to speak on behalf of the ASSP Long Beach chapter.
First off, whether we didn't get my picture up there, I always agree with OSHA, no matter what. I'm Denise Thenis. I'm a member of the ASSP Long Beach, and I'll show you, do we have our little, yeah, we do. This is my 8th year being involved in the stand down. And I'm very honored to be here today talking about our group. There we go. I think we want to start with this. So ASSP nationally gets involved in a lot of the science of fall protection. I myself am a CSP. I also have a master's degree in industrial hygiene, a master's of science. So this side of things, committees and all that I find myself in them a lot. So we have been very involved in some of the standards for buckles, anchors, fall protection, mesh, things like that. I can't think of the right words right now. And one of our committees is very, very involved in work with setting the standards and setting them to industry and regulators. Okay, this is, oh, God, I never know what slide we're on. American Society of Safety Professionals has CEU programs. So if you need continuing education units, we have those available. We have the 4 steps to designing an effective fall protection system, implementing industry best practices. These are just some examples of what we have. Proper equipment use and training. This is a quote from Tom Kramer. No matter the job, worker injuries and fatalities are preventable. He's one of the fall protection experts, and he's been involved in several of these committees. ASSP was established in 1911 and continues to work in the field. Now, our local group, go ahead and go to that one.
I think the next one's up.
Oh, I think it was the first one. Our group one. Right there. So this is our local group. We get involved in a lot of activities. We were in the WISE event, which is Women in Safety Excellence. This was our holiday party at the end of the year. This was our group getting involved in disaster and emergency preparedness. And then this is our current president, Lewis, and Matt at the beach doing the beach cleanup, where they had a bonfire afterwards. So this is our group gets involved in a lot of different things. We're a platinum level. And one of the things that I do for the group is I write the newsletter and edit the newsletter. And I'm pretty sure not anybody reads it. But we do a lot of things. And you can go ahead and get on our website, ASSP Long Beach, to see what we do. All right.
Thank you, Denise. So up next now we have Jeremy Trask. Jeremy's also an instructor here at the California State University, Dominguez Hills, and teaches the fall protection courses and scaffold safety courses as well.
Thank you, Raul. Make sure this works. Okay, perfect. Just checking that. Welcome, everybody. Hope you guys are doing well today. Thanks for coming and spending some time with us this afternoon. And what's interesting is I've been in this industry for many years now, a couple plus decades. I started out as a laborer in the field, working for a small scaffold business here in Gardena, Southern California. And falls were an issue then, 25 years ago. They're an issue today. And that's not changed, interestingly enough. We as a collective community need to start evaluating and understanding those reasons why. Because at the end of the day, we have technology, we have product, we have training. Some companies, many, have enforcement. But yet we're seeing startling rates of people experiencing fatal falls. So much so that whole weeks nationally are dedicated towards this. And I find it remarkable that here we are, still, after all this time. I thought for sure when I got started into the industry with just a simple body belt and a 6-foot rope style lanyard, non-locking snap hooks, that eventually this issue of falls would probably take care of itself. But quite frankly, back then, even though we had body belts and straight 6-foot rope style, non-shock absorbing lanyards available to us, nobody wore them. Because if you did, you were a sissy. What's wrong with you? Why are you scared? Get up there and build this thing. And back in about 2003, my boss came to me when I was working in the field there and said, hey, you need to get into safety because safety is going to be huge. That was his exact words. Talk about some good insight for what the next 20 years of this industry's trajectory would actually look like. So let's get into some of the nitty gritty, the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about today. I'll spend a little bit of time with you going over mostly on the ANSI side of these requirements. Now, we have some other presenters here. As mentioned, Stacy from 3M is brought a wonderful litany of product here, and she will talk more on the specific application of some of these systems and some of the technology that's available to us. I'll speak to it on the ANSI side, because on the ANSI side, that influences a lot of what we do in terms of program management, our policies that we need to have, maintain, and influence. Not to mention some of the other things like categories of anchors, which is different than anchorage connectors. We'll get into some of the updates too, related to the latest ANSIs, latest and greatest, that is. Keep in mind, these ANSIs I'm referring to categorically are the Z359 set of standards. And the Z359 set of standards runs 18 different volumes when we include 0.0, which is definitions, 0.1, active fall protection systems, all the way out to 0.18. There's a ton of stuff here. And keep in mind, this standard had evolved beginning back in the early 90s and consistently had been added to, changed, adjusted. There were certain periods of times where some of the volumes created a conflict between themselves, and a lot of that's been sorted out in some of the more recent editions. But here we go from 1992, 96, 98, 2000, 2002, 2007, 2011, 2012, 2014, 2018, 2020, 2021, 2023. Holy crap, there's been a lot of updates in terms of the technology and the procedures for how fall protection, both active and passive systems, can be used. Now, to touch on this a little bit, I mentioned been in this industry for quite a number of years in the scaffold industry, which inherently, with a scaffold system, by virtue of the fact it's a scaffold, means that we're putting human beings up in the air. Anytime that occurs, especially on temporary platforms, naturally, along with that means that we have to establish certain protocols for how we're controlling and dealing with those falls. And frankly, when it comes to scaffold systems, it's not a perfect world. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. Sometimes compromises are made, but at the end of the day, we need to have some established protocols for how we're doing this. Now, we know, because it's been mentioned already, falls are the leading cause of death in construction. And in fact, in many industries, whether it's maritime or general industry environments like refineries, warehouses, cellular tower networks, tend to be the leading cause of death is from falls. And so even though we've had an upward trajectory of an increase in the size of construction by the total number of workers in the industry at large, that is represented in this hashed blue line that we see here, we have seen the per capita rates of falls to flatline. We are still seeing the same percentages of workers dying 20 years ago that we are today. That's insane. How is that freaking possible? 13.7 is the exact number per 100,000 workers. So for every 100,000 workers, we're going to see approximately 13 to 14 fall-related deaths in the industry. It's absolutely remarkable to me that that's what's going on. And this table that is in front of us here that will have some of this product that's going to be demonstrated is just barely scratching the surface of what's available. And again, we have training, we have policy, we have enforcement, and we're still seeing fatalities. Now, why is this? Well, I think there's a lot of different reasons why. But I think where our safety industry tends to lose a little bit of focus is we go, okay, we have this equipment, we have this gear, and here's how you use it, and you put it on like this, and you attach this anchor over here, and you got to rescue somebody like that, and that's all good stuff. That gives people the knowledge, but we're missing stuff here. We're missing a huge aspect of this in this industry, and that, frankly, is worker perception. Now, there's this idea, and this was a study done by Texas A&M University back in 2021, of risk habituation. And the idea of risk habituation is that familiarity of what we're doing breeds complacency. And it's simple. It's not unlike a lot of things that we do in our day-to-day life. If nothing's bad happened and we did something that was risky, we're going to do it again. We get these mental rewards. It's natural in just being a human. We take shortcuts, we look for the easy way outs. So ingrained in who we are, we're going to take risk. And if there's no consequence for that risk, we're going to do it again. You see it constantly. Think about it. We see 40,000-ish people killed in the United States in a vehicle accident. Huge numbers of people dying in vehicle accidents. But yet you can go out to this 91 freeway right here, and everyone and their mother's doing 85 miles an hour, if you can. If you can. If it's 2:30 in the afternoon, you'll be doing, like not even close to that. You'd be lucky to break 5 miles an hour. But at the end of the day, you will do this doing 85 miles an hour with one hand on the wheel and the other hand with the cheeseburger, cruising down there, just trying to do your thing. And you'll keep on doing that, even though you know it's dangerous, even though you may know personally people that have died in vehicle accidents, until something happens. And that something might be as simple as, hey, you got a speeding ticket. Here I come to ruin your day. Whoop, 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 whoop. You get pulled over, and you pull away from that vehicle stop that you just received, and you're looking at that speeding ticket, and you're doing the math, and you're going, dang, man, it's going to cost me $600, $700, something like that. This sucks. So that day, you don't do 85. You're back down to 65. Then at some point, you're going to go, 70 miles an hour. 72 miles an hour. Geez, everyone else is doing 80, so let's just do 80. You're increasing your speed because you're getting away with it and nothing's bad happening. If every time you exceeded 65 miles an hour and you got a speeding ticket, you wouldn't speed. And that's what happens with risk habituation, is that we will do things, workers will engage in processes that they know is inherently dangerous, and when nothing bad happens, they do it again. Because at the end of the day, we've heard these responses, that doesn't happen to me. That happens to somebody else. Nothing bad happens to me. And then we can compound psychological facts like stress, maybe it's home life stress, maybe it's work stress. We add in the urgency to get certain things done in the industry, so shortcuts begin to be taken. And that's before we even get down into this idea of social modeling in which workers will repeat habits that they see. You have some apprentice who's out there in the field and seeing their foreman not engage in good safety practices, well, they're naturally going to mirror that. They don't want to be the odd man out. Now, what's also interesting about some of these studies is the psychological effects of this have a lot to do with personalities that we deal with in the industry. As good safety professionals, I think there is nothing more beneficial that we can do for our workforce than getting to know these people personally on a one-on-one basis. Hey, what are you about? What are you doing? What's going on in your life? How you been lately? Simple questions, engaging these folks. You need to know the personalities of individuals that you're dealing with. Now, I'd love to spend, frankly, hours on this topic because the psychology of safety and what we do, I think, is probably the biggest driver in why we experience any injury, not just fatal falls, but any injury, frankly. And it's something that we overlook in the industry. We focus on like the practical side. How do we get this stuff out there and how do we employ it? But what we need to focus on the person, the human, the individual, the attitudes of that individual, their emotional states. Because people who are not very agreeable, these are your high-risk people. This study had proven that people that generally have a negative attitude towards just anything, it could be society, it could be government, it could be safety. Those types of people generally are going to engage in more high risk. People that are more agreeable will tend to be the ones that follow the rules a little bit more and they're less risk averse. So touch on these individuals, find out what they're about. And it's not always easy to do, I get it. And as these organizations grow in size, it gets harder and harder to be able to do those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, if you want to be successful, you have to do this. Now, what are some things that we can deal with in order to avoid this complacency related to falls? Well, this study also talked about some of that. And probably one of the more neat technologies that's starting to emerge in this space is VR technology, in which this study took individual workers, put them in a simulated environment with VR, and had them experience a simulated accident. And if you haven't had a VR headset on in your life, I'm sure you've seen the YouTube videos of the people running into walls and jumping off of the floor and they're landing face first on the ground because it felt real to that individual. And so to replicate an accident in a virtual space is going to be real to that brain in that moment. And I think that's a really cool technology that an approach that we can certainly leverage in this industry to help those people who maybe are not quite as agreeable to start experiencing those effects of an injury and then start to change behavior. That's one way. There's a multitude of other different ways to deal with this. Perhaps we start considering breaking up our training groups based off of the people that we know and we deal with. You know you have a high-risk group of individuals that, like I keep saying, are less agreeable. Well, how about we tailor specialized training to those folks that might look a little bit different than the ones that buy into the safety process is a little bit easier. Now, as a safety professional, you may not want to do that because unless you're ready to get a bunch of darts thrown in your back, you may not want to pull a bunch of non-agreeable people into a room and teach them about safety. But you're going to have to do that. At the ground level, when this stuff matters, you're just going to have to do that, and you're going to have to get good at it. You're going to have to go to those dirty construction trailers where there's a bunch of iron workers or whomever it might be that really don't care what you have to say. You got to get comfortable as a trainer in those kinds of environments. If you're role modeling, having people demonstrate good safety habits, encouraging that culture across the board, that can help start to break these cycles of habits that we see so much. Rotating individuals through their various tasks, having people do the same thing all the time, well, naturally, you're just going to be complacent with it. You're going to get comfortable with it. This is just shown so many times in that most people, most human beings that are not necessarily inherently afraid of heights, at around the 10 to 15 foot level, usually will adjust to those working heights within a couple hours, maybe a couple days at the most. But very rapidly, a worker is going to become comfortable with that working height, not perceive it as a danger, and then consequently, at that point, we've lost. Dangerous perspectives are key to our psychological understanding of the risks that workers are taking. You have to tap into that. I can't emphasize that enough. We can teach people how to install a good anchor. We can teach them how to put on a body harness. We can teach them how to rig up a connecting system. None of that will matter if they're not doing it because they believe they need to. I'll give you an example. Back in 2008, West Los Angeles, one of the first fall fatalities that I had to investigate. Individual working on our scaffold platform about 15 feet above the deck, above the ground, was on the top of a scaffold system that was fully guardrailed. On top of this scaffold deck was a variety of other access systems to increase their working height, such as rolling units and ladders and things of that nature, all of which were installed safely and compliant. Now, keep in mind, this large area platform that I'm referring to that was elevated 15 feet was quite sizable in nature. It was about 50 feet by 150 feet long. So this worker is a metal stud framer, had to get up and screw off some metal stud clips, but they were out of his reach from the platform that he was standing on. And instead of going about 100 feet down the deck, pulling over a proper rolling unit that was fully guardrailed and accessing that clip in that manner, he stood on the guardrails. He had one foot on the top rail of our scaffold system and the other foot on the top cap of some metal stud. He reaches up with the screw gun to drive that screw in, his foot slips. And during our investigation, you can clearly see on that top cap of the metal stud an accumulation of dust, and you can clearly see an imprint of a foot and that sliding action that occurred. He just slipped. He went down 15 feet head first, landing on that bottom track, completely severing his carotid artery across his neck. So not only was it a massive blunt force impact trauma when he hit the ground, it became a nightmare of a bloody scene. So when I show up to do this investigation, what was remarkable to me, I showed up about probably 20 minutes after his fall. He died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. It was a massive pool of blood, 8 feet in diameter or so, blood everywhere. It was a little shocking. And in that pool of blood was a cut up full body harness. So when the paramedics came to show up and triage him, and they started removing body clothing and body harnesses and things like that, he was wearing a body harness. Come to find out, 2 weeks prior to his training, 2 weeks prior to his fatal accident, he had fall protection training. He was given that equipment. He was told to use it. He was aware that something he was doing necessitated additional safety equipment. That's why he was wearing it, but he didn't use it correctly. He didn't take the right steps to protect himself from that fall. Why? Well, unfortunately, obviously, we cannot ask him why. But this gentleman had been in the industry for over 18 years. My strong suspicion, just given the fact that I've been doing this for a long time myself and I've seen it, he had done it before. Wasn't the first time, unfortunately. And that perceivable gap that he was dealing with between those guardrails and that metal stud that he fell through probably did not seem like a very dangerous environment to him at the moment. It was roughly 18 inches of open space. So you see something like that, you look at it and you go, yeah, sure, I could probably fit through there if I fell, but who's really taking that kind of time to think about that exposure? It cost him his life. And it cost an organization sanity and peace. It caused a lot of people much mental anguish that had to deal with that. And it was entirely preventable at the end of the day. Completely. With just a little bit more care and thought. But yeah, here we are. Tap into that psychological aspect of the people that you're dealing with. That's going to breed more success than anything else. Because I couldn't even tell you how many fall-related accidents I've investigated through the years. Yes, I'm the president of Commercial Scaffold now, but I always was, and I was a director of safety 5 years ago. Actually, it's 6 or 7 years ago. Numerous falls, numerous. I got stories for days. Some were fatal, some were non-fatal. Some people walked away without a scratch. I've seen people fall 18 feet and get up and walk away, go back to work the same day. There's no guarantees about how you fall and what will happen to you. But I've also seen a fall as little as 6 feet kill people. Is that a risk that people are willing to take? I think at 6 feet above the ground, most people aren't terribly afraid of the environment that they're dealing with. And therein lies the danger. Does anybody here in the room, or maybe even online perhaps, want to share a near miss, an accident, something that they're willing to open up about a little bit? Some of this stuff's quite personal. But I think we can all benefit from hearing from it. Any near misses anyone's dealt with? Fall related? Yes, sir.
Stepped on a piece of wooden scaffold that I looked at and I thought, this really looks sketchy. And I didn't want to step on it, but everybody else had walked across it and So I did, it gave underneath me and I broke my left ankle.
Wow.
And that put me off work for a while and I wasn't covered by insurance at the time.
Terrible. Thanks for sharing that. So you're on this scaffold that had some wood planks, and you noticed that the wood planks might have appeared a little sketchy. But what do you think you were thinking in that moment when you saw that? You're like going, I've seen this before.
Everybody else walked over it.
There you go.
It didn't collapse under them.
Yeah, so why would it happen to me until it does? Well, I'm glad you're okay to the extent that you're here and you're not more severely injured. Thank you for sharing that. Share your stories with your people. Do it. Share your stories. They're powerful. It taps into that psychological aspect of what we're dealing with.
There's someone online who wants to share their story as well. Nisa, they'll be able to speak shortly.
Great. I'd love to hear that.
Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, to give you a good example, it ties right in what you were talking about. Had a facility re-roofing the whole flat roof. Knew there was soft spots. We put up cones and barrier tape saying, I don't know what the stability is. We know you're redoing the roof, but this one's soft. We went out of our way to mark it out. I show up for the investigation looking at the area, and an individual on the roof fell the 30 feet to the concrete below, and he lived. He I believe if I remember right, he broke like some ankles and he cracked part of his back. The amazing part was I remember looking at my senior VP going, if this dude was a cat, he just spent 8 of them.
Right.
And he fell through the roof. The visqueen deflected him. The guys weren't working in the area because they happened to be on break. The piece of equipment was lifted out of the way. And oh, by the way, there was no forklift. So you kind of get the idea you were talking about. The karma, the planets aligned. The guy may not have thought he was lucky, but I remember looking at it. It was unfortunate what he had, but I'm like, there were so many things that the guy still lived. That's what boggled my mind.
Thanks for sharing.
Worse yet was it was clearly demarked. Don't go over here.
But obviously they didn't respect that barrier. They decided to cross through the barrier anyways.
Mm-hmm.
Well, isn't that the case when we have barricade zones up in the industry? We put a barricade zone up and people just go right through it. Our workers complain to us all the time. In the scaffold industry, we're erecting a piece of scaffold, and one of our concerns for other workers in the work site is they're going to be traversing through our area and we might accidentally drop something. There's a billion little parts and pieces that get handled by hand, and you just might accidentally drop something. So barricade zones gets established. That's the only way you can control something like this, is keeping people out of those danger areas. Do you know how many workers look directly at one of my foremen, directly at one of my employees and go right through that danger tape? Don't even care. Don't even care. They don't even look up half the time to see what's going on as to why that barricade zone's there. And then some of these people have the nerve to get mad at us for controlling that zone. That's your non-agreeable person. That's the one that has to be tapped into psychologically to get them to realize that what they just did there put themselves at grave risk. And both of these stories that were just shared, that were so wonderful to hear, and again, thank you for sharing those, are two environments that tend to experience the highest rate of fatal falls: scaffolds and roofs. There you go. I'm not surprised. It's a story as old as time at this point. We have to break this cycle. We have to do something about it. We've heard the cliches. It starts from the top down. It starts with this. It starts with training. And it does. It does. We have to perceive danger for what it is and not become complacent with it. So what are we going to talk about over the next hour or so that we have together? Well, since it's only an hour, you can frankly turn these topics into multi-day lectures, which is why we have our 3115 fall protection course and our 3085 scaffold course. And even with the duration of up to 4 days for these courses, we're still scratching the surface on some of these topics because they can be very deep in their content. So we'll discuss a little bit about fall assessment, trigger heights, edge classifications. That edge classification is going to be important when we evaluate some of the updated Z359.14 requirements related to SRLs and the newest, latest and greatest labeling and performance requirements for these pieces of equipment. We'll discuss a little bit on hierarchy of fall protection because at the end of the day, there is a document referred to as the Z359.2. That's called Minimum Requirements for a Managed Comprehensive Fall Protection Program. That is the de facto standard associated with our program policies that an employer shall maintain. We know OSHA requires a fall protection program. Well, when you're writing your program, you're developing your company policy, it needs to be based in some sort of standard, and that standard is the Z359.2. By the way, those are some of the things that we talk about in our trainer course for fall protection. We provide sample programs to students. We go through those program elements that are in there. So the professionals that are dealing in their organizations that don't have these policies have that format and that structure to be able to build out those policies. And that .2 standard does touch on these different characters of our hierarchy in that when we are making that fall assessment, we have to go through these 1 through 5s that you see on your slide there, starting with number 1 and determining why number 1 may or may not work. And if it doesn't, then we go to number 2. And if we can get number 2 to work, great, we stop there. But if we don't, then we go to number 3, all the way down till we're down into our administrative systems. We'll touch on some of that. Talk a little bit about training requirements, and then some overview on the ABCs, like I was mentioning, specific to the ANSI Z359. Fall assessments. There's a lot of different ways to deal with this. Now, when you make your fall assessment, it is crucially important that we just don't assess it once and assume that these exposures remain static, particularly in construction environments. In some of our other more static environments, such as a refinery or a water treatment facility, depending upon the nature of the work, our fall exposures might remain relatively static, and the control methods for how we deal with those become a little more easy to deal with at times. But especially in the case of construction, shipbuilding, our maritime industries, we have rapidly changing environments where there might be a structural anchor available to us to attach to one day, and then the next day that anchor's gone because it's closed up with the wall system or it's inaccessible. Or the phasing of work requires that those passive guardrails that are installed for purposes of fall protection on a building somewhere now need to be removed during a glazing process or a wall installation to close that building off. So what does that look like? So when we're making our assessments, we have to assess that work from the beginning throughout the entire duration all the way to the end. And that duration might be hours, days, months, even years. But if we don't think about how that process works, we're going to just throw out a piece of equipment and go, here you go. Here's your 6-foot lanyard and go tie off. And you know what? A good worker that's agreeable will do just that. They'll tie off with the equipment provided. May not be a good thing though. Because while that equipment might have worked for one environment, it may not work for the other environment or that next phase of the work. But a good worker is going to go, you know, the boss told me to tie off, so darn it, I'm going to tie off. And sometimes we see the inadequacies of where workers decide to attach those connecting systems to because they just want to do the right thing, but maybe aren't aware or maybe aren't provided with the right equipment to be able to do that. Floors, roofs, scaffolds, ramps, walkways. Let's not think about our fall protection as only being above ground level. We can have plenty of falls at ground level to a lower level. Concrete vaults, pits, galvanizing tanks, repair facilities, mechanic shops that have in-ground pits inside of them that present fall exposures. Identifying these areas throughout that phases of work and then coming up with a control method for that each phase is what this purpose of this fall assessment is about. Duration of task, how long are we doing this for? As in the case of in a general industry environment, for Cal OSHA specifically, the frequency of work where workers have to go to a roof and access that does drive and dictate the type of safety system that has to be utilized. So specifically for more non-routine tasks, which means more than 4 times a year to access a roof, well, now we're not able to use administrative fall protection according to Cal OSHA. We have to shift over into conventional fall protection. What's conventional fall protection, you ask? Guardrails, safety nets, covers, and active systems. So fall restraint, fall arrest. That's your conventional systems. Your administrative systems, you know, this whole idea about staying 6 feet back or putting in a barricade zone or something like that, that doesn't apply depending upon the frequency of that work in a general industry environment according to Cal OSHA. Crucially important, our fall assessment evaluates the practical side of what we're dealing with, along with meeting that regulatory expectation. Wrap that all together and plug it into a training that touches on that psychological aspect of the worker, and now you're headed on the right path. Not easy, but it can be done. Environments like this. Here we've got a worker in this photo on the right, exposed to probably what's an elevator pit, with a 5-6 foot fall down to a level below. Now, even if we're not dealing with the 6 foot trigger height as mandated by federal OSHA, still doesn't mean that it's not a good idea to protect things. Human beings fall at ground level. I mean, how many people die in a year just in the morning getting out of their shower? You hit that head and you hit it right, it's not going to be a good thing. So our fall assessment should take us a little bit beyond our regulatory responsibilities and start to touch on the actual risk that is presented to the human doing that work. Just because we're compliant doesn't mean we're safe. Fair enough? I think that's a fair statement. Just because we're compliant doesn't mean we're safe. At Commercial Scaffold, CSI, our procedures are to guardrail everything. Everything. Everything gets a standard guardrail. It could be a 20-inch high scaffold platform. That's getting a guardrail. And now think about why. A scaffold system means it's a temporary system, elevated platforms to get workers access to a wall system for whatever purpose. Now, where is their focus for a worker that's doing this? Is their focus on that scaffold deck as they're moving around working on that work surface? No, they're looking at the work surface. And so they're walking along, doing their thing, focused on painting, focused on scratch, lath, and brown, focused on caulking windows. But at the end of the day, they're not necessarily always aware of that fall exposure. And a step back means a fall off a scaffold even 20-inch high. It can kill people. It certainly can injure them severely. Sir, how high was your fall on that scaffold platform? 2 feet. 2 feet, broken ankle. Terrible. Terrible. Terrible that humans are so fragile, right? It's terrible that our bodies are not more robust than what we are. It would be nice if we could fall 2 feet and not have it injure us too much. I know I would appreciate that. I've fallen a lot on dirt bikes. Not at work. Not at work. And I've got the broken bones to prove it. It's just sad that we're so fragile. And so this guy right here, this guy's doing flat work, concrete finisher. His focus is not on that fall exposure. His focus is his work. Therein lies the danger. Scaffolds. Out of all industries in construction, or let's say out of all trades or crafts or work operations that we see in the construction environment, what is the #1 citation that we tend to see year after year after year after year? What are the leading citations that contractors receive? And it's not because Big Bad OSHA wants to get out there and just get you. Anyone want to take a shot at that? What is the #1 citation that contractors receive? I'll give you a hint. It has to do with what we're talking about this week in the nation. It's related to fall protection. Specifically, it tends to flip-flop, but the top 2 are either a lack of guardrails on elevated locations on construction sites, just generally speaking, whether it's an elevator shaft that's not guarded, or a roof, or some other unprotected edge going around the perimeter of a building. That's number one. And number two is a lack of fall protection on a scaffold system. Like I said, they tend to flip-flop sometimes. Sometimes you'll see one go higher than the other, but at the end of the day, thousands of citations are written a year across the United States as a result of lack of fall protection on a scaffold or lack of fall protection just somewhere on a construction site. That's a cue to us. We got to be doing something different. Scaffolds get tricky to deal with. You got a temporary system built in a fast pace where unique shapes create holes and gaps in areas that get difficult to deal with. It's common that scaffolds lack in fall protection. And by the way, as we're going through this, for those of you that are online, and including in the room here, of course, if you have questions or even a comment, please, let's hear it. We're not dealing with 1,000 people online that are just going to bombard us. So if you have something you want to shoot, whatever it is, I'm an open book. I'd prefer to have this back and forth dialogue than just you guys hearing me yap for the next hour or 45 minutes or whatever it works out to be right now. Yes, ma'am.
Jeremy, I do have a question from Warren. He asked, what do you see on the horizon coming in January with our framer and roofers when the California code changes?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk, and it's kind of funny. This change related to roofer fall protection, which has been at 20 feet in California for a very long time, finally looks like it might make some headway here in terms of adjusting that regulation. Now, we have some Cal OSHA people online, and I would, if you guys know, Derek, right? That's our Cal OSHA rep that's here. Derek, if you happen to know with regard to, yes, correct, Derek's online, yes. If he knows in terms of where we're at. Now, I do know that it looks like finally our trigger height for Cal OSHA has been, and there's a long history as to the reasons for this, has been at 7.5 feet for years and years and years, decades, frankly, since the inception of Cal OSHA. And so it looks like it's going to be adjusted down to 6 feet. Oh, Hassan is our Cal OSHA rep. He's federal OSHA. Okay, sorry. It's been a whirlwind of a day, you know. Just a lot of build up to get up here and talking to everybody and stuff. Hassan, are you familiar with some of the rules? I know that there's a plan to adjust this down from 7.5 feet down to 6 feet, which, by the way, for just general fall protection rules in construction has been a conversation as part of this rulemaking process for Cal OSHA for years. But I think finally now we're actually going to see it change. Is that the case?
No, our program has to be as effective as federal OSHA, right? So, that's in the works, and normally the standards board are the ones that are working on promulgating that standards. You know, we just have to adopt it. It's in the works, and if you have any comments, you can call the standard board to voice your opinion about it. You know, some of the industry in California are against the 6-foot fall, but it's in the works, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the case, and I've seen this for decades, and where these conversations with Cal OSHA's had, hey, we need to drop this down to 6 feet, and it looks like it's going to happen. Industry gets involved, comments start happening, and Cal OSHA rolls back on it, ends up keeping 7.5 feet. Cal OSHA seemed distracted for a few years through COVID, so they didn't seem to have too much interest in adjusting fall trigger heights. Hassan, are you seeing, sir, any changes coming down the horizon with roofer fall protection for Cal OSHA? Do you think that 20-foot rule for roofers will also be adjusted down to 6 feet, or hearing any rumblings about that?
The standard board is working on that right now. So, but it's on the horizon. But you know, for framers, normally it's 15 feet. For new roofing, it's 20 feet. So, so it's in the works. So
it's in the works. So yeah, it's yet to be seen. I'm aware of some of this because I see these in these safety publications that these conversations are being had amongst Cal OSHA, and as of right now, we have the law as it stands, and it doesn't look like it's going to change just yet. Keep abreast, though. Yes.
I have a recommendation from Samuel. He's asking for California fall protection. What fall protection devices do you recommend for power linemen that are working on roofs? The job consists of working at about 9 feet and working on residential roofs for a duration of approximately 10 minutes.
Ooh, short duration work. That becomes a real hard one to deal with. especially if they're working on an older home that may not have integrated fall protection systems built into them, because some of the newer homes are having anchor points put into the ridges of them. At the end of the day, without seeing a picture and knowing exactly the specific environment that we're dealing with, I'm already hearing some cues here about what types of systems would be appropriate and which ones wouldn't. Specific to our connecting systems, now naturally, we're not going to use a 6-foot long lanyard with a 3.5-foot shock absorber attached to it to protect workers in that kind of environment for fault arrest. My first consideration and encouragement would be, can we implement a sort of restraint system where this is going to be driven based off of the roof size, shape, and of course, roof pitch. But at the end of the day, if we can rig up a restraint system that prevents a worker from reaching that unprotected edge, that would be most preferred. And then we would start going down our hierarchy from there. And because we're only dealing with a 9-foot high fall to a lower level, that's going to eliminate a lot of these systems that are available to us. Most broadly speaking, what I would strongly suggest for these kind of environment-specific questions, engage your manufacturer representatives out there. You know, we have a rep from 3M that's here, Honeywell, Faltech, whomever. You know, I've had great experiences with most of these providers that are out there. 3M's always been fantastic. Get these people out there, ask them. You'll come out to the site and take an evaluation of what their needs are, and then start providing recommendations for the type of equipment that's appropriate for those environments. Because man, long gone are the days of just a body harness and a 6-foot long lanyard. We're well past that at this point. And there's tons of stuff available to address those. What you got?
And then one more from William. Has there been any suspension trauma deaths in your industry? For instance, fatal blood clotting from suspension.
Not that I'm aware of in the scaffold industry specifically. I am aware of a few fatal deaths in the telecom industry for suspension purposes. And what's being referred to here, and I'm sure Stacy is going to talk more about orthostatic suspension intolerance, what happens to the body physiologically when you're suspended in a full body harness, and there's a constriction of those femoral arteries, a lack of circulation, creating a lot of other issues. In the scaffold industry specifically, I'm not aware of any. There's been plenty of issues on the telecom side. In fact, the United States Air Force did a study in 2002 evaluating the suspension trauma for parachutists and the like, especially parachuting getting stuck up in trees. And Renee Aguilez in 2011 did a study titled, Does 911 Work for Rescue? And I saw your slide. You do have a slide in there about 911 working for rescue or not. It don't work for rescue, does it? No. And so time is of the essence when it comes to rescue. We'll touch on that more too. Great questions. I appreciate you guys online engaging us here and give us something to talk about. Anyone in the room?
I have someone online who wants to speak. Christopher Trask.
Who's that guy?
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I just had a quick question. You know, for leading edge work such as scaffold systems, et cetera, I know many employers jump to an administrative form of fall protection as a first line of resort, it seems like. It's a common thing that's done. Is this an appropriate trend to continue out there in work practice, considering the latest equipment innovations that exist that we see on the market and the updates and ANSI standards that make this equipment better in service for employees?
What's your background, Chris? What do you do?
Director of Safety for Commercial Scaffolding.
Oh, that guy.
Thank you.
He's in the scaffold industry. So it's a very valid question. And this is something that I see occur in the industry largely, in that when we consider large scope categories of our fall protection systems, I can break it down into 8 different types of systems. Of those 8, we can categorize those as either elimination type of approaches where we're not exposing a human to a fall in the first place. Conventional systems, which I mentioned, guardrails, covers, fall restraint, fall arrest, and safety nets. And then administrative systems down at the bottom. And administrative systems are your warning lights, controlled access zones, safety monitors, OSHA written fall protection plans, and the like. And what ends up happening with many scaffold erectors out there is they tend to default straight to the administrative system without eliminating the conventional systems first. And that's something that we have to do. I touched on the Z359.2 requirements. That is something that ANSI standards mandate we do as employers, is to go through those 8 different systems and provide reasoning for why we're not able to use those systems. But yet there's many people out there that will just go, oh, you know what? We use warning lines, or we're going to establish a controlled access zone and designate a safety monitor. And then they just go to work, completely not trying to evaluate whether or not active fall protection, active being your restraint and fall arrest systems, as a feasible and viable option. So no, it's completely inappropriate that contractors and employers are doing this, that they're allowing workers to assemble a scaffold system without integrating fall arrest systems or fall restraint. I'm telling you right now, it can be done. And the reason it can be done is because of technology. That's why. I'll give you a little background. Back in 1998, Federal OSHA reserved a section of the appendix of Subpart L, the scaffold standard, titled Feasibility for Fall Protection and Fall Arrest Systems for Leading Edge Scaffold Builders. So the intent in 1998 was to establish processes, procedures, and protocols for how to integrate a proper conventional system with the scaffold build. That section's been reserved since then. So here we are almost 30 years later, and we don't have any guidance to that. But I'm here to tell you that nowadays, and has been the case for probably the last 8 to 10 years, we have technology that can help scaffold installers while incorporating fall arrest or fall restraint with their scaffold build. You see scaffold builders out there not tied off while they're erecting or dismantling? There's a 90+% chance that they just went straight to administrative systems, didn't even care, didn't even evaluate this stuff, and just went out there and started building this thing. It's a very damn dangerous practice. Good trained people will erect that equipment, doing it correctly, incorporating this fall arrest. Companies and organizations that, we'll just write a plan and say we're safe and we'll get up there and we'll build our scaffold. I'm saying this because I've seen the plans from scaffold companies out there through the years. I've evaluated them and I've looked at them and went, they're off base. At the very least, they've opened themselves up to a multitude of OSHA citations. At the very most, they're going to kill somebody. I don't know. Good question, though. Here's our trigger heights for construction environments. And naturally, in general industry as well, naturally, our trigger heights do vary depending upon the work that's being done. Notice it doesn't say anything about the company name or the type of insurance that they have or the environment that they're working in necessarily. It really just drives what they're doing here. Are they doing construction? Are they doing general industry related work? Are they working off a stairway or a ladder? That's going to drive these trigger heights. There's a lot of nuance here, and we talk about this in these fall protection courses. Now, what is an unprotected edge and what is a leading edge? And this is a common sticking point kind of for me in that the vernacular of what's used in the industry is not always entirely correct. And I try not to be too nitpicky, but at the end of the day, how we classify our edges is what drives our type of fall protection system that we're going to use. Now, an unprotected edge sounds pretty obvious because it is. It's an edge that doesn't have a wall, parapet, or guardrail at least 39 inches in height, and there's greater than a 6-foot fall to or lower level. Those two components combined is what gives us back the definition of an unprotected edge. Unprotected edge allows for a variety of different safety systems to be installed. Conventional systems, administrative systems are oftentimes an option. Sometimes it just depends on the work. Now, leading edges are a little bit different than unprotected edges. Now, we can see that I've identified our unprotected edges as a static edge, because that's really what it is. It's an edge that's not moving. It's just an edge that's there. It doesn't matter where it's at. It could be a roof. It could be an elevator shaft, a utility shaft, but it's a non-moving static edge. Again, without a guardrail greater than 6 feet to a lower level. Unprotected edges shall be protected by means of conventional systems. Unlike our leading edges, let's think of leading edges as a moving edge. That as a result of construction or dismantling of things, we've created open holes or gaps or voids to a fall for a lower level. That's what a leading edge is. It's an edge that is being constructed and that edge is moving. So scaffold builders that are erecting a scaffold system and we're adding levels above us and adding planks and things like that. Well, every time we've added a platform that's unguarded, I've just created a leading edge. And then I add another platform and another leading edge. As soon as that work stops and we're no longer actively engaged with that assembly or disassembly process, that now becomes classified as an unprotected edge. Now, again, I'll say one more time, the reason that these categories are important to understand is because the type of safety protocol we're going to institute does depend on this edge classification. Again, with leading edge, allowing for administrative systems or conventional systems, with unprotected edges, only allowing for conventional systems. Not too hard to understand, but there's a lot of nuance there, of course. Ramps and walkways, those have different trigger height requirements depending upon where they're being used and where they're at. They present their own unique hazardous environment, slips, trips. Another leading cause of injury in the United States is a slip trip. It doesn't necessarily have to be a fall from above ground. It can be a slip at that walking surface. So anytime our platforms exceed a slope of 2 and 10, we need to install skid resistant coatings, chicken ladders like we can see right here, chicken boards across it or something, anything to create some traction between the footwear that the user is on and that ramp surface directly. That's our magic number, 2 and 10, slope of 2 and 10. Now, through our hierarchy of fall protection, I've kind of been touching on this a little bit, but let's unpack it a little more specifically so we understand what we're looking at here. Elimination is always going to be preferred. And that's something that for every work process and environment, we should be asking ourselves, do I have to put somebody at an elevated surface in the first place? Because the answer is no, then let's do that instead. Of course, that's not always feasible. I mean, gosh, after all, like we've kind of been touching on scaffolds at times. By nature of a scaffold, it's a temporary elevated work platform. So just what it is means that elimination is not a possibility in that regard. Then from elimination, we start working our way down these various systems. If we can't eliminate the fall by way of not putting a human in the air, then we go, well, can we have a passive system? Passive systems are things like guardrails, covers. It's a physical barrier to prevent somebody from falling over that edge. What happens if you're not dealing with an unprotected edge and now you got a leading edge where that edge is moving? Well, is a guardrail passive system really feasible? Of course not. You're not going to be able, in a lot of environments, maybe it's an iron worker shaking out Robinson decking across structural steel. It's not feasible to have that leading edge area where they're working move a temporary guardrail every time they lay down a new sheet of Robinson decking. So then the next question is, okay, well, can we do fall restraint? Fall restraint would be like a dog leash, keeping people from reaching that unprotected edge and experience a fall. Well, if you can't do that, just by nature of how things are moving, where your anchor point is located in relation to those fall exposures, then we're going to be down in fall arrest. Subsequent to that, if we can't do fall arrest, we're going to be down in our administrative systems, our controlled access zones, our warning lines, and we've seen these through the years. We'll touch on those just a little bit as we get into some of these systems. But before I do, why do I have fall restraint as being more protective and more preferred than fall arrest? Got fall restraint listed as number 3 and fall arrest listed at number 4. What's the difference? Why? Why is fall restraint better? Any thoughts? Oh, let's hear it, sir. Why do you know this, by the way? You look familiar. You didn't mention it was the best class you've ever taken.
It was the most amazing class ever. Fall restraint avoids the worker from ever having the option to fall in the first place. Whereas fall arrest means that you're going to risk the worker falling and you're going to have to stop that person from falling after it has occurred.
Awesome. And so in that regard, with restraint, does that mean that we don't have to deal with other things that we would have to deal with if it was fall arrest?
No, with height, you've got angle of, there's some sort of angle that you have to worry about so that at no point are you able to fall from the unprotected edge or leading edge of the building. Perfect. So I forgot the name of that though.
That's quite all right. It's been a while, right? So thank you, Jason. Appreciate you, man. Thanks for helping me out around here. I don't like tomatoes in the room. It might be a tomato. Engage me. I don't bite, I promise. So fall restraint, because there is no fall, unlike fall arrest, that means we don't have to rescue anybody. We kind of talked about a little bit about rescue, like as far as the orthostatic suspension intolerance. Again, that'll be elaborated on. But at the end of the day, if there's no fall, there's no rescue needed. Beautiful. One of our issues that we are becoming aware of is that orthostatic suspension intolerance for a human hanging in that body harness is detrimental to that human. So if there is no fall, there is no rescue, there is no orthostatic suspension intolerance, there is no exposure to other people performing a rescue. All those things that go with fall arrest on the after fall side do not occur with fall restraint. So that's one massive benefit right there. That's huge. The other thing is we're going to discover is anchor strengths can be lowered for fall restraint as opposed to fall arrest, because somebody's not actually experiencing a fall and pulling on that anchor, we can have a reduction in that anchor capacity. Now let's go through what these elimination systems, our hierarchy of controls, might potentially look like. We saw this graphic right here of on step 1, elimination 1, of that adjustable pull with a little frog at the end that grabs onto a light bulb. Work performed at surface walking level. That's one way. Another way are encapsulated building systems. Sometimes they're referred to as cocoon type systems that wrap the entire structure. And these systems are put onto hydraulic jacks and moved up with the building as various floors are erected of that structure. So there's no need to individually go through and install guardrails immediately as each new floor is poured in place or erected with structural steel or whatever the building's made out of. Now, maybe we can't have a cocoon system and minimize that fall exposure, but we can eliminate the duration of time that workers are exposed. So as we go through that hierarchy of control, maybe we find ourselves down into administrative systems. And as a result of our fall assessment that we perform, we should be asking ourselves throughout all these phases of work, can I move up into higher form of controls? Hey, we're down here dealing with warning light systems. Can I move up into fall arrest? Will this phase of work allow us to move into fall arrest? Or even better yet, would this phase of work allow us to move up into elimination systems? Changing our sequence of work sometimes can allow us to move up into higher forms of controls. And frankly, that's what we see in a couple of these photographs right here. In that, otherwise these prefabricated roofs would typically be installed by framers walking top plates, assembling the trusses, laying them out, putting on roof sheathing, and all those other things. Now that system gets flown up as a unit. Eventually, workers are going to have to engage fall arrest, but for the duration of time that these things were assembled, it was done so at ground level, eliminating that fall exposure and the duration in which they would otherwise have been exposed. We do this all the time in the scaffold industry. Now, when we do a 3085 scaffold class, we're probably going to spend about 3 or 4 hours discussing the nuances of how to incorporate fall systems with the scaffold assembly or disassembly. So suffice to say, it's not something that we have time to go into in any great detail, but do know that in the scaffold industry, the way things get assembled, we are minimizing our fall exposures, or we are minimizing the duration of time that we're in those lower levels of fall controls. And we're sequencing our work, so we're as high up that level of fall control as possible throughout that phasing of work. Now, if guardrails won't work, maybe we need to look at covers. Covers have to be installed over any open hole. Labeled, designed by a qualified person, meet a 2-to-1 safety factor for that environment. That 2-to-1 safety factor is going to have to be based off of the type of equipment or environment that we're dealing with. In other words, what we build that cover out of will depend upon its use expectations. You have forklifts driving across that cover, board carts, semi-trucks. That's going to look a lot different for the composition of materials that you're using over that hole than if it was just humans walking across it. That's why qualified person design for a cover is necessary to evaluate these kinds of things. Labeled as hole or cover, Cal OSHA requires that hole or cover communication is done so in a way that the worker understands. It can be color coding. It could be in Spanish or whatever language. It doesn't matter as long as the worker understands what the purpose of that cover is. We don't do covers. Maybe we're in our passive barriers. We have standardized heights and strengths and things of that nature for our guardrails. A standard guardrail is 42 inches in height, plus or minus 3 inches. So a minimum height of 39, maximum height of 45. And the mid-rail approximately half the distance from the walking surface to the top edge of that platform. Support 200 pounds of force on the top rail, 150 on the mid-rail, and 50 pounds of force needed on the toe board, downwards or outwards. Get those toe boards nice and tight to the deck, no large gaps in there. And these toe boards are great because they're intended for falling object protection. However, they don't protect from all falling objects, particularly stuff that might be held in the hands or stuff that is piled higher than the toe board and might get kicked over and knocked down to workers below. Hell, it might not even be a worker. Just talking about this out loud makes me think about 10 years ago, there was a UPS truck driver in New York that was killed by a falling tape measure. Poor guy got out of the truck to deliver a package to a job trailer, steps out, gets racked in the head by a freaking tape measure that fell off a high-rise building, kills him. Hard hat's not going to protect you from everything. There you go. There's your pound force requirements. Keep in mind these toe board requirements do not mandate any particular safety factor by standard. And all that means to us is don't lean on them, don't push on them, don't turn your back to them. You don't need to test your guardrails by pushing on them. I know that sounds like really kind of duh statement to make, but there's been tragedies by people checking and testing their guardrails and pushing on the darn thing. Don't do that. There's no need to. A visual inspection will do 90% of the work right there. The other part of that, manufacturer instructions for the devices, just like we saw in that prior photograph of that little stanchion base installed according to their directives, that'll get you the capacities you need for that system. Down into active systems, fall restraint. I took this photo at Disneyland. We see a couple of drummers up here attached to a pole with individual eyelets for restraint purposes, non-shock absorbing lanyards. This is a straight 2-foot style cable lanyard that's there. That's great. That is fantastic. We'll see these anchor strengths here real quickly. We talked about fall arrest. That's our next hierarchy of control. Doesn't stop the fall, but it should stop the impact to a lower level. Should. As long as you're using it correctly, it should. It will, right? It will. If you're using it correctly, it will. Have confidence in the product, Stacy. Believe. She's like, yeah, it'll work. After that would be safety nets. Now, safety nets as a primary form of fall control isn't something that you tend to see in the industry all too often, but they are becoming more common. That is for sure. And the nature of where these things are starting to become more common is as a secondary and backup form of fall protection. And the beauty of these systems is that many of them aren't just only designed for fall protection of a person, but they're also designed for falling object protection as well. And maybe you've been on a job site in downtown LA or something. Dropped objects are a huge issue. You got a building that's 400, 500, 600 foot high. Well, you drop something and it can end up a long distance away. UC Berkeley did some studies about a decade ago of dropped objects and their projection distances associated with that dropped object. And the projection distance for a given object striking a structural steel rail, an I-beam, a concrete corner can be quite remarkable. You can have up to a 1-to-1 ratio of that object being dropped and the projection distance for that same object. So in other words, you drop an object 200 feet under the perfect right conditions, that object could deflect 200 feet away from that structure. So what do we do? Well, safety nets can be installed up tight. Objects get dropped, they land in the safety net, not going down below and potentially landing on some poor lady pushing a stroller down Olive Street or something like that in downtown LA. There we go. Look at that scaffold system. That's a pretty one if you ask me. The cool thing about that project was the fact that it utilized a variety of different systems on one project. They used the cocoon system, and you can see that depicted in the yellow up at the top. So as this poured in place concrete structure was being built, they moved that cocoon system up. Now immediately following that cocoon system were safety nets installed below that, both for falling object and falling person protection. Now at the same time that these safety nets were installed, active fall protection was utilized to finalize the installation of guardrails. And so here we had a project that used a multitude of different approaches to address falls in the workplace, and frankly, was highly successful. A big project with a lot of things going on around there. Be creative in how we approach these. Let's talk about our administrative systems. As we get into this, let me make this statement right now. If you are dealing with an unprotected edge, not a leading edge, and you are not dealing with roof work specifically, OSHA's opinion of the matter is there is no safe distance back. That's written into a standard interpretation from them. There is no safe distance back, but yet we hear people all the time say, just stay 6 feet back and you're good. There's no such thing. There's no law that says you can stay 6 feet back and magically you're protected. It's driven by the type of the work that's being performed and where it's being performed at. Those two factors is what drives the type of warning line or control line that might be necessary. And 6 feet might work. Maybe it needs to be 10 feet. Maybe it needs to be 15 feet. That depends on the nature of that environment and what they are using on that roof or that elevated surface. So it's not as simple as just saying, oh yeah, stay 6 feet back from that edge and you're good to go. No such thing right now. Understand that. Now, warning line systems are intended to be for roofers performing roof work. Warning line systems are not a physical barrier that stops or prevents somebody from falling. They're just a visual indication of something unsafe. So in other words, it's, hey, don't go past that line, something's dangerous on the other side of that line. Yes, sir.
Actually, I was going to say that 6 feet is pretty good because most job sites I only see like 2 feet.
There you go, exactly, right? If you can get 6 feet out of it, you're winning. Because darn it, we're doing roof work and we got to get to that parapet. So if we just squeeze that distance a little, complacency, we set it at 5 feet. That's kind of good enough. We were at 6 on the last job, but nothing bad happened. So let's just set it at 5 feet. And then you do 10 jobs at 5 feet and you're like, well, OSHA didn't show up and we didn't get a citation and nobody fell yet. So let's move it to 3 feet and then 2 feet and then tragedy. And then all of a sudden, the fines, the issues, the lawsuits, and now it's back to 6 or 10 or 15. I don't know, man. We humans are just interesting creatures sometimes. We just do silly stuff. Flagged every 6 feet, 16 foot-pounds of tip-over strength. So again, obviously that's not nearly as strong as a guardrail. That's enough for durability to keep the wind from knocking it over and things of that nature. We have a nice transition area from the portable extension ladder going up into this designated area it's referred to as, and within this designated area, roofers performing roof work can utilize these systems in combination with a safety monitor. Safety monitors alone as a sole form of fall protection are generally not permitted, with certain very limited exceptions. Roof widths less than 50 feet, and stuff like that. Now, general industry had expanded the laws and more mirrored the construction standards back in 2018 because what was being seen is an increase in the per capita rates of falls in general industry. And this was coming from telecom. You know, we ended up with 3G, 4G, and 5G cells, so a lot of workers were exposed to falls in that industry. Warehousing, distribution centers, think your, Amazon type distribution centers where just massive exposures now that weren't so commonplace have become extraordinarily commonplace. So in 2018, federal OSHA brought over a lot of the construction laws to the general industry side just for a little bit more coverage. And specifically, they brought in administrative systems as form of controls. And most importantly was a training requirement because at the time, pre-2018, there wasn't a training requirement necessary for general industry environments. And training is absolutely required, of course. And I think that should go without saying, but federal OSHA has gotten pretty specific in that not only do we provide training with a formalized certificate showing that that person has been trained. Now, currently, it is permissible for workers to be trained by their employer. Personally, I think that's something that the evolution of law should probably address. If we want to start getting down to a little bit more success with our fatal falls, let's start addressing the nature of who's providing training to these people. Because in my experience, I've seen it done where an employer sits their people down, they put them in a big room, and they spend 20 or 30 minutes on this stuff. And it's like, okay, well, what did those people really get from a 20-minute training? But technically speaking, if they covered those topics, well, that certificate is not any less valid than one in which a 4-hour training was provided. So that's my opinion, but maybe we can do a little bit better on that side of things. Start considering bringing in some independent trainings. Bring in your 3M representatives and people like that to provide a different perspective on what the employer is typically exposed to. Now, our anchor connectors. Let's categorize for an active fall protection system our anchors and anchor connectors. They are two different things. I won't go into too much on this because I'm just going to touch on the ANSI side of things. Stacy's going to get into the actual rigging up and the use of these connecting systems. But at the end of the day, our anchors will classify under two different types, meaning the anchor is the structure, the building, the item that we're attaching that anchor connector to. And then within that, our anchor connectors are going to classify as a variety of different types. With our permanent anchors, our single-use, single-person anchors are our type A anchors. And this stuff is covered in the Z359.1-2020 standards. Our type B anchors are multi-use, single-person anchors. These are the ones that are intended to be relocatable and reusable. Not reusable in the sense of like you fall and then you reuse this concrete grip anchor, but reusable in the sense that you install the anchor, you have an active system attached to it, maybe has an SRL draped off of it, and then you're going to remove that anchor and install it to another location. That's your type B anchors. And your type Ts are your synthetic crossarm straps and other types of temporary anchors that are out there, also designed to allow for SRLs to be installed and hanging off of them, because some of these anchors, as is in the case of our type Es, do not allow for permanent or a long duration of a heavy SRL attached to that anchorage connector. Your type Es are your specialty anchors, and generally speaking, those type Es rely on friction between that surface and the item that we're attaching to. So this is a fall protection, fall arrest system cart. AES makes a variety of these different things. I think Solid has some friction anchors too, right? Some vacuum pad anchorages and stuff like that that can be utilized that literally draw a vacuum on the substrate that they're attached to for purposes of fall arrest or fall restraint. I'm sure you'll touch on some of that a little bit further. We've seen weighted plate anchors, water-filled anchorages for restraint purposes. The world's your oyster when it comes to our options available nowadays. Virtually no excuse. These anchors are not designed and intended for long-term permanent attachment of heavy SRLs to be attached to them. They are single-use, single-person, and they're of the deforming type called type D anchors. Common with your wire form anchors, the ones that just bend over and deform as part of that fall load. Now, that covers our anchorage connectors. What do our anchorages, what we're attaching to, what do those need to look like? Well, I mentioned that we're going to categorize our anchors into two broad scope categories, either certified or non-certified anchors. Non-certified anchors are the ones that you see up here with the corresponding loads. That's identified by a competent person who uses their judgment to identify structures that will carry 5,000 pound for fall arrest, 3,000 pound for positioning, 1,000 pound restraint, and 3,000 pounds for rescue. So it's requiring that competent person to use their judgment, which is different than a certified anchor, which has to carry a 2-to-1 safety factor for that system. Won't get into that too much. Take away Stacy's thunder here. But at the end of the day, a 2-to-1 safety factor for the entirety of that system that's being used. It relies on the user to evaluate the type of connecting system that they're using, determining that maximum fall arrest force, applying a 2-to-1 safety factor for that system, and then that becomes your anchor connector requirement in terms of pounds that you're attaching to. So for example, what this means is if you have a 6-foot shock absorbing lanyard and that lanyard allows for a 6-foot free fall, and under that 6-foot free fall, we'll see a 900-pound arresting force. That means that that certified anchor shall carry at least 1,800 pounds, 2 times that expected load for that system. That's where that 2-to-1 safety factor comes into play. Now, those certified anchors, those need to be designated, and I just tell people an engineer. That's easier. Because the standard says, under the Z359.1-2020, that these certified anchors are identified by a qualified person using, and I quote, nationally accepted, recognized engineering methodologies. So they're really pushing us towards an engineer for our qualified person design anchor points. Any questions about that? Complaints, grievances, or disagreements? Good, I don't care. Yes, ma'am.
I do, since we took a little pause, I do have a few questions.
Oh, they got stacked up on me, huh?
Yes.
Okay, what you got?
From Don, he asked, what type of fall restraint do you recommend for bucket trucks?
Ooh, I don't recommend fall restraint for bucket trucks specifically. So with bucket trucks, cherry pickers, let's just say categorically aerial lifts, whether vehicle mounted or otherwise. My recommendation, and this is a recommendation, not an OSHA thing so much, is that we use restraint inside of these aerial lifts. And here's why. So aerial lifts are considered a type of scaffold, all aerial lifts, however it's designed. Now, scaffolds are covered under the 453 section titled aerial lifts, coincidentally enough. Now, in that section, it mandates that we use fall protection in accordance with 502D16. Well, if we go over to 502D16, it refers to fall arrest and all the things associated with fall arrest. Here's the problem. Fall arrest doesn't prevent a fall, obviously. It means that somebody can be ejected from the carriage of that aerial lift, and then consequently, they're going to end up at some point below the height of that carriage. Now, there is a requirement under the OSHA standards that stipulates that when we are using fall arrest, these systems have to be set up such that the employee neither free falls greater than 6 feet, nor contacts any lower levels. And there's your problem. Because until that cherry picker, that bucket truck, that aerial lift, that zoom boom reaches, it's going to depend on where that anchor is attached to and stuff, but reaches anywhere from about 10, 12 feet to 18 feet above the ground. If that person is ejected, they are striking the ground. And now we're in violation of that 502D16.3 requirement, which says we shall not free fall more than 6 feet, nor contact any lower levels. So therein lies the problem. Consequently, I now, and have been for a while, highly recommended using restraint. What does restraint look like? Straight lanyards, short lanyards, not PFLs, not your SRLs, not your little SRLP devices, but actual short lanyards. And they make straight non-shock absorbing lanyards that can be adjusted. They make them 8 feet long, 6 feet long, 10 feet long, and they have a friction buckle on them, and you can adjust that lanyard down to whatever length you desire. So it requires a little bit of training, and it requires a little bit of awareness for the people that are dealing with this to go, okay, I need to shorten this lifeline up short enough so if this carriage starts to buck on me, it's not going to eject you over those rails. So use restraint is my recommendation. And the reason for that recommendation, like I said, ties back to that 502 requirement. Yes.
I think this might be a follow-up. Is there a roof degree? This is from Dan, and he's asking, is there a roof degree pitch maximum for fall restraints and a length? I'm referring to fall restraint systems in a roof.
No, there is not. And that's a very good question. Now, roof pitch does drive certain types of safety systems. So categorically, let's classify our roofs as either being low sloped or steep sloped. Low sloped roofs are roofs that have a pitch of less than 4 and 12. Steep slope roofs have a pitch greater than 4 and 12. Now, if it's a low sloped roof, we are able to use conventional systems or administrative systems. If we are in the steep slope roof category, greater than a 4 and 12 pitch, well, that pushes us over into the conventional systems only, which naturally would include things like fall restraint. Now, the issue with using fall restraint on steep slope roofs should be fairly obvious if we think about how that dynamic might work out. Restraint systems don't always include things like fall arresters, shock absorbing packs integrated into that lifeline system. And so the caution and danger I have about using restraint in a steep slope roof application is if we are not diligent about where the worker is in relationship to that anchor, we can end up in a situation where there's a lot of slack developed in that lifeline. And that slack means, well, when the worker slides off that roof, extra potential free fall. And if you're dealing with a straight lanyard that has no shock absorber in it, we got big problems. So it's not prohibited. It's just one of those things that we need to watch out for and make sure that anchor remains high up on that roof and that lifeline remains taut without a lot of slack developed into it. 2 feet is the maximum. 2 foot of free fall on that restraint system. Good questions. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. All right. So we talk about tie off to scaffolds, tie off to various, oops, sorry, my buttons here. I'm getting all mixed up on my buttons, my apologies. So sorry for quick clicking around. When we talk about where we're attaching our anchoring systems to, just think structural. No piping systems, insulated pipes, ducts, unistrut, all thread drops, plumbing pipes, vent pipes. It needs to be to the structure itself. Essentially, think of it like this. If it's supporting a part of the building, you're probably on the right track. And without really spending a lot of time on it, it's hard to go beyond that kind of statement. But know that in our 3115, this is something that I spend about half a day on. It's just good anchor selection. With regards to scaffolds, well, that's a very technical term for scaffolds, sir. Scaffolds. Industry term. Only the cool kids know it, so I guess you're in the club now. Here's my advice. Get it in writing from the scaffold supplier about how and what to attach that fall arrest system to. Don't just assume all scaffolds can carry a falling person. Trust me, it relies on so many different factors. The height of the equipment, the amount of planks, the crosses, the foundations, the bracing, all this stuff, the way the scaffold's tied to the structure, if the scaffold legs are secured together, all drives whether or not that scaffold's capable of supporting a falling person. My advice, get it in writing from the scaffold supplier. Carabiners, snap hooks. So let's shift gears over into the Z359 updates that we are seeing here and some of the evolution of this. There was a period of time where non-locking snap hooks were acceptable with low gate strengths. That occurred in 2007, where our gates shall support 3,600 pounds instead of the prior standard, which only needed to support 250 pounds on the gate. All of our snap hooks, all of our connectors shall be self-locking and self-closing. Freely self-locking, freely self-closing. Your mountaineering style carabiners that are not being used for rescue, but are in fact being used for fall arrest or fall restraint, they cannot be of the thumb screw type. They shall again self-lock, self-close freely. Rescue systems barring that. Now, with regards to our connections, we want to make good, suitable, compatible connections, not loading on the gate, not loading across the inappropriate axis of the snap hook. I know this is going to be touched on by our 3M folks here. And we had a substantial gate strength upgrade in 2007 as a result of snap hooks failing, rolling out, and becoming disengaged. These big lobster claws, I've heard them called, large opening snap hooks, those need to be installed to your anchorage connector or directly to the anchor itself, not to your back. Now, with regards to our lanyards, there was some updates too as of the recent. Most of these updates in the Z359 standards pertaining to all these style lanyards have to do with labeling and load capacity for the user. There has been an increase from 310 pounds to a maximum body weight user of 400 pounds for these systems. Also, there is additional labeling that manufacturers are required to have on their lanyards themselves. In particular, your Y-style lanyards like this one on the right that would designate what snap hook needs to go to the user, where the two legs go to the anchorage connector. Just all things that were updated. Now, our lanyards now have to use standardized labeling, our 6-foot freefall lanyards, that is, for your just regular synthetic web lanyards, that is. You'll notice that this label has a white label, black writing, and then the inverse color, black label, white writing. The purpose of that is for a user to easily identify the maximum free fall limits for that lanyard, with a white label black writing, meaning 6-foot free fall, and a black label white writing, meaning up to a 12-foot free fall. Most of this purpose is to allow for foot level tie-off when you're using a synthetic web lanyard. That's the idea behind it. We had a lot of updates in our connecting systems on the SRL side in 2021. And this is kind of cool because finally we have some standardization in the industry about how we're using these things. This pictogram that you see on the right in that triangle with the lifeline draping over the edge is being phased out in lieu of the type of lanyards, SRLs, type 1 and type 2, that you're going to see coming up here. Now these lanyards are now going to be broken down, or SRLs rather, are going to be broken down into either leading edge type or overhead connection type only. Those are your two major classifications. Now let's look at what happens when a SRL in incorrect application is being used. So a non-leading edge type SRL that's being used in a leading edge type configuration. What we mean by this is having an SRL attached to the user in an anchor, and that lifeline is going to drape over that unprotected or leading edge.
Right, David, on top? David, there's no, David, David, I think there's no shock. On this.
So this is a drop test leading edge with no shock pack.
You guys ready?
Yep.
Okay, we're good to go. We're gonna drop. Headache.
Keep in mind, that was 3/16 wire rope cable that was severed. That wasn't synthetic web. That was freaking metal cable severed like it was a hot knife through butter. All as a result for not using an SRL in the correct orientation. I got stories for days of these things failing on people as a result of not using the correct lanyard configuration. Does it look like when it's correct?
This is an actual test with a shock pack.
You guys ready?
Yep.
3, 2, 1. Hey, that's a better result. Yeah.
Big difference there. All of it had to do with just a category of that fall arrest SRL in its configuration. The first video depicted a class 1 SRL used in a leading edge application and consequent failure. The second video you saw was a class 2 SRL being used in its appropriate configuration with the shock pack integrated into it. Energy absorbing lanyards. We can see that there's a 3.5 foot of deployment in that shock absorbing system. It obviously happens very rapidly, and that purpose is to lower the fall forces for that system. Unlike a standard class 1 SRL that you're going to see in this video, that only allows for up to a 2-foot free fall before that system locks. Very rapid lock. Now, what are these labelings looking like in these upgrades under the 0.14 standard for SRLs? Well, we have P for personal fall limiters, R for rescue systems. Categorically, we're going to refer to these systems as SRDs, self-retracting devices as a whole. New labeling requirements, new testing requirements, which would also simulate a head-first fall, which was not a requirement under the 0.7 standard before. Dynamic load testing, load capacity indicators or load failure indicators are also something that's required on these devices. So there you go. Notice this class designation, class 1 and 2, white label, black writing, and then again, black label, white writing. All in the idea of making the identifications of these systems very seamless and very easy to identify how it gets to be used. And these things are mandatory to be on these labels now. No, we do not need to get rid of these things and change our old devices, but just be familiar with these labels because that's what we're dealing with. Class 2, above or below the worker's dorsal ring, with class 1 only being above the worker's dorsal ring. Yeah, these distances have changed in terms of the total fall distance. And at the end of the day, just refer to the manufacturer's chart for their fall distances. These charts are also required to be posted on your device itself for a class 2 type of lanyard. And like I said, you can keep your old stuff. You don't need to get rid of your old stuff and bring in new stuff. But just know that this is the change that we're seeing going forward here. Along with a nice warning card that's provided with all these devices as well that looks just like that. And a label that provides for the off-axis fall clearance and the consequent setback distance for that SRL and the unprotected edge. These are the kinds of charts that we spend a lot of time on in our 3115 classes to become familiar with how we use these systems, because they're not intuitive at the end of the day. We can't just give this stuff to people and go, all right, be safe, be careful. It's not natural to know how to rig these things up. So without further ado, I'm done. Thank you.
I do have a question online from anonymous attendee. Is there a requirement on how far the warning line needs to be from the edge?
Yes, there is a requirement for how far the warning line needs to be from the end. It's going to be a minimum of 6 feet back from that unprotected edge, and in some cases all the way out as far as 15 feet from that unprotected edge. It depends on what's going on up there. You got to refer to these regulations to know what that setback distance is. Any other questions? Not off the hook yet. Okay, cool. We have a person in room that's going to ask a question here.
Real quick, I don't know if you want to go to one of the slides, but I think it was class 2 and the class 1. You can use the class 2 equipment. I think it's that one, and have your anchor at or above your dorsal wing, and there wouldn't be any issues. But you cannot do vice versa, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so you won't have them rigged up simultaneously. Your class 2s will have a wire rope lanyard for the material of the lifeline, with a shock absorber built into that to allow for that additional free fall. Yes.
What will be a recommendation for a job like roof cleaning on a flat roof?
Restraint if possible. Restraint if possible, and assuming if this contractor is attending multiple work sites, that they're a service contractor going out to service these environments, and consequently, it's not an environment that they can control regularly. If it's your building, it's easy. Get some anchors installed up there, put some guardrails up there. They can be temporary, they can be permanent. That's ideal. But if it's a contractor that's having to service multiple buildings that are not theirs, that becomes a little more challenging to control those falls. So that's where these friction, those type E specialty anchors, just Google search type E specialty anchors. There's a whole variety of these friction anchors out on the market, and they'll likely find something that'll work for them. That's it. Cool.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Sure.
As always, anytime I sit through your presentations, I always end up learning something.
I love it.
Thank you.
I try. Talk too fast sometimes though.
Okay, up next we have Stacy Arthur from 3M Safety, Personal Safety, from 3M Personal Safety.